Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Dissident Dispatch at The Reason We Learn. I am very glad to be here, and I am glad for you guys to join me. So today is Monday, May 13th, 2024. For those of you tuning in on the replay, you'll know when this occurred, when this was a dispatch, but the information is not going to be outdated anytime soon. In fact, towards the end of the show, I'm going to give you information I think you're going to be able to use towards the end of the summer of 2024 and going into the fall. Hello, hello, Adrian. Very happy to see you. So, as the title of the show indicates, I'm going to go over a few topics tonight. I will be talking to you about what the media is not telling you. And what I mean by that is, what they're how they're spinning things a little bit with things they are telling you. So there's sort of a hidden story they're suppressing a little bit, or how they're just plain ignoring things that are out there. Obviously, I wouldn't know about them if somebody in the media weren't talking about them. But when I say they're not really telling you, they aren't elevating certain information to the same level as other information. So what ends up happening is what bubbles to the top, what they're telling you most of the time is only a part of the picture because of what you end up seeing in the talking points and on the mainstream outlets, and even what bubbles up on social media most of all. So you might miss some other messages. So we'll talk about that. And that has to do with the campus protests and everything swirling around the end of the academic year. The second thing we're going to talk about is more of an end of year update of where do we stand in American education at the end of academic year 2023, 2024, because the year is ending. Graduations are happening. Kids are finishing up grades and tests, and pretty soon it will be summer vacation. And, while that means school's out, so to speak, in a few weeks, it doesn't mean that you parents, if you're parents watching the audience, are, going to suddenly have this great break. If things didn't go as you had hoped this past year in any respect, academically, socially, whatever, politically, you may be looking towards next year in terms of what should I be doing? I've got the summer. I didn't want to do anything while school was happening. Now I've got the summer. What should I be thinking about, Deb? What's coming down the pike? How did we do as a country? Where are we going? So we'll be talking a little bit about that so you can factor that information into your summer thinking and decision making. That's the topic for this evening. The first thing I'm going to start with is the question that may be on your mind. Does the college protest activity we're seeing, these encampments, et cetera, does that reflect what most students think and feel and what they're concerned about at the end of this academic year? Does that accurately, if I were to look at social media or even turn on the news and see what everybody's talking about and the protests and the encampments and the crowds and the cops and the shouting and the screaming, is that an accurate reflection of today's college student and what occupies their time and their brain and their attitude? Well, no. That's good news, right? That's good news. Now, I've been telling you all along, take this stuff seriously. It's not a joke. And I still say that. And I'll show you why I still say that. But it's not, my reasoning was not then and is not now, because it's what the majority of college students think and feel. It's not, as it happens, but it doesn't need to be, does it? But in case you're wondering, this is an Axios poll. Most college students, this is not in their top. What? Oh, wait, it's last. So they're, interestingly, would you have had healthcare reform as the thing they're most concerned about? I find that fascinating because we're talking about young people. We're talking about young people. So the likelihood that they have chronic health conditions or they're very worried about their health conditions is, I would have thought, would be lower than this, that this wouldn't be an issue. But apparently it's number one, which I find really interesting. And I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that they are coming out of college and going into, an uncertain career world, and maybe some of them want to be on their own or entrepreneurs, and they're not really excited to go into um, the corporate world where you might get health insurance, and they're realizing how much our current healthcare structure sort of forces you into being an employee if you want health coverage, because trying to buy it on your own is very expensive, even through the so-called exchange. So here's what it says. College protests against Israel's war in Gaza are dominating headlines, but only a sliver of students are participating or view it as a top issue. Why it matters. This is what Axios is saying. The poll hints that the war and the accompanying protests might not hurt President Biden's election prospects among young voters as much as previously thought. So that's one way to look at it. I think it's probably a correct way to look at it. I know there are a lot of people watching and saying, oh, this is it for him. He's done because of how the college students are behaving. Well, if it's not even bothering the students that much, it's not, this whole issue is not really bothering them, and they're worried about healthcare reform. That's anybody's best guess. I don't really see the Republicans talking about healthcare reform at all. Have you guys seen anything? Am I missing it? I mean, I keep my ear to the ground. I'm not seeing them really talk about it. It's like a dead issue. It's immigration. And I'm not saying immigration is not important. And I'm not saying what's going on campuses is not important. But I feel like it's just not being discussed, and yet it's the number one issue. So if anybody out there is listening from the not Biden people, maybe talk about it, because your voters between the ages of 18 and 24 are probably at this point 18 and 26. Because remember, at 26 is when these kids roll off mom and dad's policies. It may be something they're concerned about, and they're a very, very large voting bloc. So I know people are so worried about the Jewish vote and the Black vote and the Hispanic vote and all of these hyphenated American votes. What about the young people vote? Because that's much bigger than you might think. And it's made up of all those other little groups too. So I thought that fascinating. And we're not really hearing a lot about it. And we're not hearing a lot about it from the candidates, which leads me to wonder if focusing so heavily on the protests is in part so that candidates on both sides of the aisles don't have to talk about this. Because to my observational, assessment here, neither party has a story to tell about healthcare. Again, if I were on the not Biden side, I would be harping nonstop on COVID policy, nonstop on the violation of bodily autonomy, and the concern that people have about the lies told by healthcare workers and, people in charge of health and human services and the CDC. So if people are worried about healthcare policy or healthcare reform, I would start there, because we need to reform the truth telling that goes on in the healthcare world. When we don't trust going to the doctor or the hospital because we're afraid they might, kill us for money. That seems to be point number one to focus on. It might not concern the young people quite as much, but there's also a lot of young people now suffering from myocarditis. So you might be surprised how many of them would be concerned about the lack of transparency. And I think given that young people tend to be more rebellious and pushing back against the man and stuff, if you can bring that to bear, that the big hand of Big Brother swooped in and actually used young people, children, as lab rats for an experiment, you might actually make some headway. They are very concerned. So maybe start talking about it. They are probably also concerned about the cost, but they just say healthcare reform. So, something like that. So anyway, that's, interestingly enough, another zoom in thing. A large majority, 81% of students, support holding protesters accountable, agreeing with the notion that those who destroy property or vandalize or illegally occupied buildings should be held responsible. They're not letting their peers off the hook here. 81%. That's big, you guys. I really think we need to take heart that the majority, a sizable majority of our students, would prefer that the law be enforced and that the rules be enforced. That's good news. And a majority also said they oppose the protest tactics, 67%. And 58% said it's not acceptable to refuse a university's order to disperse. All majorities. The majorities get smaller. I don't know how we reconcile 81% want to hold them accountable, but only 58% say it's not okay to resist the university's order to disperse. How do you play? So don't order them to disperse, but what, expel them? I mean, I guess they must be wanting some other kind of accountability. That said, students were still more likely to say they support the pro-Palestinian encampments than oppose them. 45% said they support them either strongly or a little bit, 30% neutral, and 24% were strongly or a bit opposed. So them not being concerned, like focusing on them is not the same as not supporting them. So remember I said at the beginning, I'm not telling you not to take them seriously, take them very seriously, and I'll show you more about why. But take heart that they still prefer the rules be enforced, and they don't, they don't, so like 81% support holding them accountable, and it's not their number one concern. The war over there is not their number one concern. So make of that what you will. I think there's more good than bad in that, but your mileage may vary. So that's the first thing that's not really being looked at. The other thing I noticed is that if you go and do a search on information about graduations, or if you're on social media, they talk a lot about the graduations that were canceled. And really, there were only a handful, I think 3 or 4. Columbia, USC, trying to remember what was the other one. It's so few, it's almost not worth mentioning. Some were curtailed or cut short because, like at Howard University, there was so much disruption that they just sort of cut it short. But it wasn't to do with the protest. It was to do with people showing up with too many guests. So it really had nothing to do with this. But for the most part, most graduations were held as planned. That doesn't mean they were protest free. It just means that they went on without a hitch. And when you think about the thousands and thousands of universities around the country, that's good news too. So, but if you were to look on social media or search, you would think that they're all being massively disrupted because the headlines tend to focus on this many students walked out and Jerry Seinfeld was trying to speak and students left. And, they focus on the negative. They're focusing on all the kids who, the small handful that, walked up to get their diploma with a Palestinian flag or left in a huff when Jerry Seinfeld stepped up at Duke. And they don't focus at the majority who are cheering and clapping and happy to be there. So, and I would agree, Adrian, so Sophia says still shouldn't have been canceled. Those admins were spineless. 100% agree. So even though it was only a few, they still shouldn't have happened. It was however many, 3, 4, too many. I just wanted to make the point that if you were under the impression because of the headlines, graduation disrupted, protest, blah, blah, blah. If you sort of had it in your head, you had a picture of just almost like COVID level shutdowns of graduations. No, they didn't have that much power. And then you have to ask yourself, why would the media, the mainstream media, I mean, to their credit, New York Times is saying, no, it wasn't that bad. But why are so many other outlets playing up the negative and even the protests that disrupted graduations that were held? Why are they doing that? Now, I have a theory. I can't prove it, but my theory is that the media, by and large, people in the media support the protesters' cause. I do think they believe the position on this war helps Biden, or at a minimum, they want to back him up in terms of his foreign policy, which is a form of support. So in other words, he's taken a very hard line against Israel in the last month, right? Including coming right out and saying, we have secret intel based on, about where the head of Hamas is hiding with your hostages surrounding him as human shields. And we're not going to share it with you. It's what they're basically saying. They say, we will if you do X, Y, Z, which is the same as saying we won't if you don't do what we tell you, which is really remarkable that the administration would put even American lives in danger, because those are American hostages, some of them, and not tell an ally where, what could actually effectively end the war. If they knew where he was and they knew where the hostages were, that's all they wanted from day one. But they're saying, don't go into Rafah and we'll give you this. What? That's your intel. And so we don't go into Rafah. How do we get him? We don't go into Rafah, and that sends what message? It's an outrageous policy. Absolutely. If another ally did it to us, every person in this country, every media outlet would be absolutely outraged, freaking out, hair on fire, not another penny to them. It would be outrageous, but Joe Biden could do it. And now I think they're running cover in lots of little ways. And one of the ways is to make it look like these protests are so much more effective and powerful and oh, it's so important for him to listen to the voters and listen to these people than it actually is. Because I believe, and I think there's evidence to support it from other people more knowledgeable than I am, that he's actually not bending the knee to these protesters. It's more to Iran and people from within the, within that apparatus. There is a member of, I believe, his national security team who is a former national Students for Justice in Palestine leader. So, yeah, there's that. There's no conflict of interest there. I think a lot of this is running cover for his foreign policy. And I will even go so far as to say, if I put my tinfoil hat on, that I think it was always the intention of the administration to take this approach, even before October 7th. And that these protests, in part, and how they're funded by some of the same entities that are funded by big Biden donors, I think it's all part of the same thing. That this administration has taken a certain foreign policy that they're fully committed to and they can't back out. And in order to make it seem like it's responsive to Americans or what Americans want, these protests have been funded, orchestrated, planned, supported, written about, encouraged, even at the top levels of, education. The Department of Education has taken absolutely no action with Title VI to, tell them you're going to lose your funding if you don't stop with this harassment of Jewish students. Just, like toodly doodly do. And I think all of it supports their foreign policy. I think that's kind of the order of it. Again, Deb's theory. Make of it what you might disagree, and that's fine. And this is just how I put it together. But the media is making a lot more of it on the optics side and how much support there is for it than I think there actually is. But at the same time, what they're not telling you, I think that they ought to be telling you, is how serious it is. Remember, I said that you need to take it seriously. Well, here's this piece. This was in Jewish News Syndicate, so not, your mainstream outlet. And this says Secret Students for Justice in Palestine documents reveal a domestic terrorist network bent on genocide. So this writer references something by Eve Barlow on Substack. Okay. This is on May 6th. Over the weekend, I read one of the most disturbing pieces of journalism I've ever encountered. Via her Substack, the intrepid Eve Barlow, et cetera, found, Google Docs. So now I'm going to go and show you that. So here we are. Student activists are pro-insurgents. I would have expected to see something this important rise up to the level of mainstream media. Remember, we're so concerned about insurgency, right? Oh, right, we're not. But anyway, last night I gained access, this is May 4th, I gained access to a Google Drive obtained by social media account Israel War Room via a source who's allegedly within the UPenn anti-war encampment. So like weaseled her way in, similar to how Kieran White gets into things. It contains over 200 documents linked below that are pro-terrorism with guidelines on how to riot and cause disruption, how to make weapons and take over buildings. Israel War Room highlighted that the drive lists Carrie Zaremba as the owner of all files, who's reportedly a spokesperson for National Students for Justice in Palestine, aka SJP. Students for Justice in Palestine has a very long track record of promoting anti-Semitism on university campuses in America. Sorry, anti-Zionism. SJP is present across hundreds of institutions and is part of the bigger umbrella organization, American Muslims for Palestine. It should be noted that SJP has alleged links to terror groups such as the PFLP, whose literature appears in this Google Drive, and PIJ, while AMP's membership contains overlap with groups that were previously shut down for supporting Hamas. So some groups have been shut down here and there, but this is still going on. And remember, I told you, people within the Biden administration have ties to Students for Justice in Palestine and CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. To trawl through the trove of documents is to take a dive into the minds of wannabe insurgents, not future hopeful university graduates. Contained within the subsections of the drive are how-to guides, including sabotaging Zionist infrastructure. Interesting. Zionist infrastructure. We're in America. So here, a Zionist is an American, I would imagine, or somebody in America who supports the existence of the state of Israel, not just Jews. So now we're talking about America. If it's in America and it's Zionist infrastructure, what does that exactly mean? Creating print propaganda, strategizing on demands and actions, establishing an autonomous zone, wheat pasting, crowd and riot control, blockading, and first aid. Are you wondering why all the encampment occupants are wearing masks and covering their identities? It's all detailed here by PDF guidelines on anonymity, security, and avoiding the police. There are documents unabashedly glorifying child soldiers, martyring Aaron Bushnell, the guy who lit himself on fire, and promoting the globalization of the Intifada. This is pro-war, just to be clear. This is demonstrating that these encampments, these protests are pro-war. So while they might only be 19% of the students who don't think they should be held accountable, and a very small percentage of students have it as their top priority, something like 13% only have it as their top priority, those 13% or those 19%, depending how you want to look at it, are decidedly pro-war against America, not just Israel. Pro-intifada, pro-globalizing Islamism. Think about that. That could be as many as 2 out of 10 students on American campuses want to globalize jihad right here in America. So good news, most of the students want to hold them accountable, though they don't personally have the power to do it. Bad news, we have a growing minority of people who are not just concerned about war in between Israel, but they pretty much want to destroy America. So that's not good, right? That's the other side of this coin. Yes, and as Ego Brain points out, they are being taught how to fight back against the cops too. So before, civil disobedience was, I'm planning to get arrested, but that's part of my statement. So civil rights movement, or even in Vietnam era of 1960s, it was, we're going to have a sit-in, we're going to occupy a building, but we know we're going to get arrested, and that's kind of part of the deal. This is something else entirely. All right. So, and it goes to also included are articles by known terrorists, Leila Khaled, Ghassan Ali, Ibrahim Nabulsi. It's a DIY occupation guide. No joke. That PDF is included too. Also, you may have noticed that a sizable percentage of people arrested on these campuses were not even, in fact, students. The widespread vandalism and destruction on college campuses in the wake of these encampments doesn't appear to be coincidence, given the paraphernalia here promoting destruction of property and violence. Now, some people have asked me, well, why would they do this? What good does it do to destroy property? How does it help people in Palestine? Well, you're assuming the issue is the issue. The issue is never the issue. Gaza, fuck Israel, blah, 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 blah. No, that's not the issue. The issue is, look how feckless and weak America is. Look how spineless and helpless America is. Look what their freedoms allow. Look at the level that they will allow their youngest generation to go because of their freedoms. Because remember, the Intifada, Islamism, it's anti-liberty. You can't do this crap over there. You can't do any of this. You can't even go out with your hair showing in Iran. Okay. So you're not doing this. That's not happening. You will be hanging from a crane. So this is by way of saying, look how decadent and demoralized and useless and feckless. And it is more about the audience at home feeling helpless, that 80% of students feeling like no one's holding these people accountable, the administration realizing that, it's like backing up their foreign policy that they already have, which is, we're more afraid of Iran than anybody else. That, again, Deb's opinion. I don't think it is, people go, oh, they're anti-Israel. It's like, they're more pro-Iran. But why? Because China. That's why. It's not really even to do with they're literally pro-Iran. They're just more willing to do China's bidding. They're more afraid of that axis than they are of little Israel. Like, they don't care. And you might say, well, we're going to lose our foothold in the middle. If you were banking on Iran eventually winning, or China and Iran eventually winning and getting rid of Israel anyway, or being so dominant that they can control whatever, and you need to kiss their butt, then this might be what you would do. If you had people within your administration telling you that's what you should be worried about and you believed them, that's what you should do. If you're even the littlest bit anti-Semitic, that's what you would do. So all of this rolled up into one ball, and this is about demoralizing us. That's what it's about. It's all about the optics, as are all of these things, getting into the building. It's just, look what we can do. And look what you can't stop us doing because of your freedoms. We're going to use your freedoms against you. So this is a very fascinating document. I'm going to drop the link over in the chat for you guys who want to peruse it at your leisure. There's a lot in there. You can even go and look at some of the documents that she found. I think it is well worth your time. Now, getting back to the protests themselves and such, and let's go back to some maybe semi good news. Okay. I'm going to try to bounce back and forth a little bit as best I can. Reuters came out with this piece yesterday. Gaza College campus rallies face next challenge summer break. Now, I'm taking this one with a grain of salt based on who they're citing, but there's some credibility to it just from a point of view, which is that, if protests on a college campus require at least the disruption of a college campus, once school is out, the graduations have happened and it becomes a ghost town like it usually does in the summer. I mean, there are people taking summer classes, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. I mean, it's just not going to garner the attention. So this is talking about what's going to happen next. What are they going to do? So Reuters went and talked to Dana Fisher, a professor at American University in DC, author of several books on activism and grassroots movements, who has seen some of her own students, blah, blah, blah. She noted the college movement spread no, it didn't, but okay, let's go with it. Let's let her have her thing. Spread organically across the country as a response to police called to campus at Columbia University on April 18th, when more than 100 were arrested. So she's claiming that these encampments sprang up in response to police showing up at Columbia. When we now have the documents, I can't believe that Reuters doesn't realize we know you're lying. Why are you lying? They're counting on you guys to not put this all together or see all the pieces of information. So what they're not telling you is, yeah, we know it's not really grassroots, but we're going to keep pretending it is for a little while longer. And because most of you guys don't know, or you haven't seen the documents that Eve Barlow has found, or some of the other documents that Politico talked about, where they've traced the funding. They know that this is official. Police have even found planning documents. I mean, Reuters is spinning a yarn here by letting her, voice this opinion without any challenge. It's like, well, she says, and that must make it true. I don't see enough, but she does say, I don't see enough organizational infrastructure to sustain a bunch of young people who are involved in a movement when they're not on campus. Fisher said, either the movement has to evolve substantially or it can't continue. Now she's hedging here because it can evolve substantially. They've even talked about evolving it. So the campus protesters have been seen in private message groups and so forth, talking about escalating over the summer, blocking bridges, blocking highways, going to private residences, we saw in Europe already, going to the Tesla factory, trying to go to weapons manufacturing companies. So I have every expectation they're going to do their level best through the summer and into the election season to evolve these protests. I think, again, this is a game of semantics where she's talking about the campus ones have to evolve, or they're going to, they won't be on campus anymore. They might come back in the fall in time for people, to get people riled up to vote, or they might not. They'll probably stick their finger in the air and try to see which way the wind is blowing with these young voters. And if a majority of them polled say they're going to vote for Biden regardless, they might stay quiet for fear of alienating new students who don't want to navigate around protests to get to their first day of college. So it's, that's a crapshoot. But this is something that they're talking about, and I find it hilarious that they are pretending that we don't know that this isn't grassroots. Then let's see, even the AP says campus protests were scaled down during the commencement exercises. Yes, they were, but they were still going on. And you see, they talk about Jerry Seinfeld and his speech. And look what they say. They say dozens of the 7,000 graduates left their seats. Dozens of the 7,000 graduates. That sounds different. What if they framed it as saying, only a handful of the 7,000 students left their seats? It would come out differently, right? or, just like what, 36, what dozens could be 24, right? Left their seats out of 7,000. Saying dozens makes it sound a little bit bigger, doesn't it? Um, and then they said to protest, Jerry Seinfeld, some waved the red, green, black, and white Palestinian flag, chanted Free Palestine amid a mix of boos and cheers, which is interesting because I listened to the speech and I didn't hear any boos. I heard a lot of clapping, a lot of laughing, a lot of cheering. I hope you guys watched the speech. It was great. Uh, he had some really fun things to say about it. They shouldn't take themselves too seriously and they need to laugh and that. I'm not going to play it here because, why bother? You can go see it for yourself. But the story to me was, look how few people disrupted it. For all the noise that was made all in the weeks before, people were in their seats and they graduated like they were supposed to. But again, if you do a general search and you look at what they're covering, protesters clash with police ahead of graduation, LAPD declares unlawful assembly outside graduation, Pomona College moves commencement ceremony off campus, and blah, blah, blah. So most of the headlines are like, disruption, this is bad. When in fact, most of the protests were quite small. It was not the big deal that everybody made it out to be. I don't want to minimize it because these protests are serious and they're run by very serious people. We need to pay attention, but we also need to start paying attention to the students who weren't there, who didn't want to be there, who expect the rules to be followed, and who seem to be very concerned about healthcare policy. So maybe we need to start talking about that. Let's see. Then what I've noticed, another thing that I've noticed is rather than focus, like I said, on what students really are concerned about, which could put Biden looking not so great and also Trump, right? It could make them both be like, all right, guys, what do you got for us? They're not doing that. They're shielding both of them in doing that. The other thing that they're doing, though, is they are trying to spin these like political narrative yarns. They can't help themselves. So we get things like USA Today, college graduation canceled due to anti-war protests. It's happened before. So now we're going to draw some kind of parallel between this and the Vietnam War, as if these situations are not analogous at all. And as I just told you, this is not an anti-war protest. Then there was another one that talked about how, where is this one? This is The Guardian, so it's foreign paper, but still. How the right is weaponizing pro-Palestinian campus protests in the U.S. Republicans are using a narrative of chaos and philosophical divisions. And the left is using a narrative of police over, police like violence, and they're violating their First Amendment rights, and these poor innocent students are being arrested, and the anti-Semitism is stifling free, the claims of anti-Semitism are stifling free speech, and these poor pitiful students. And so they're both doing it. I just happen to find the Guardian articles. That's one of them. And here's the next one. This one made me want to throw something at the screen. Campus protest crackdowns claim to be about anti-Semitism, but they're part of a right-wing plan. Right? So it doesn't matter which side you look at. I happen to pull these. You could go on the right-wing sites and you'd be like, the leftists are taking over, whatever. The truth of the matter is, it's this big a percentage of highly motivated, very well-funded, very well-organized, pro-war, pro-Islamism protesters. And the vast majority of those who are sort of like, the Marxist DEI, I glaze over when you ask me a question because I don't really know what river, what sea, whatever. They're going home for the summer. The people we need to worry about are the ones who have nothing better to do than collect a paycheck for blocking a bridge. Those are dangerous. And because they're going to keep things going all summer in other ways. So then we get to, I think I went through all the stuff about what they're not really telling you. Yeah, I think that about covers it. So, summary of this topic. What is the media not telling you about the campus protests? Let's sum it up. They were widespread, but less deep than wide. So they appeared all over hundreds of campuses, but 81% of the students felt like they should be held accountable for breaking rules and breaking laws. And the number one concern of college students right now is healthcare reform. And their lowest level concern is this war, which is appropriate because it's not happening here or to them. And what they're also not telling you is the bad news that the breadth of the protests is a function of the highly organized, highly trained, extremely well funded, not at all grassroots organizations behind the narrative that Israel essentially needs to lose this war, that Hamas is engaging in just, just resistance, and that everything we saw on October 7th was Israel's fault. And therefore, the Biden foreign policy of essentially turning on Israel is totally fine, totally appropriate. Okay. They're not really covering it that way. That's my summary. Now, let me go take a look at some of your chat activities. First of all, hello to everyone. Hello, Ego Brain. Hello, again to Adrian. Hello to Deuce Voltage. Glad to see you again. And what does Nomo say? Nomo says, although there's a small faction of green-haired hoot owl bespectacled commies at the universities in the area I live, disruptions would be thwarted by attendees. Exactly. They're wide but not deep. And like I said, don't mistake my smile for we don't have to pay attention to this. We kind of do have to pay attention when you even have 13 to 20%, give or take, of our students who are perfectly fine wanting to globalize the intifada. That's not good. We're doing something wrong when 2 out of 10 kids has that opinion. And then Leave Them Kids Alone says, or 0.3% of students. Maybe you can clarify. Not really sure. And then Sao Sophia says, reminds me of the American Association of University Professors saying something very similar. Again, because I came to this after you said it, or after I was talking, so I'm not sure what you mean by something very similar. Maybe you mean similar to what Nomo said. And then Sao Sophia says, some universities will also have summer camps for high school students. Yeah, they will. So I really hope they don't continue this all summer on these campuses, especially with high school students present, but I doubt they will because the bang for buck isn't there. They need to go where they are going to get the highest number of cameras on them. And saying something similar to the news article. Yeah, because they want cameras on them showing how disruptive, how powerful they are even with their small numbers. So they can block a bridge. Now the good news is the Manhattan Bridge in New York, they tried to block the other day. And there's a video somewhere showing the police marching towards them and just wrapping around them and taking them into custody. So I am hopeful that the message is getting received by some of the local, city governments, whatever, that, no, we're not going to have this. We're not going to tolerate this. And I hope that sticks. And I guess what Leave Them Kids Alone was saying is the math of the percentage of students that protested Jerry Final. Yeah, it was so tiny. So tiny. And, I really believe there's it's not only because it's disruption and chaos sells. I think it's the narrative they want. I think the narrative they want is people want this. People want Joe Biden to tell Israel to stuff it. All these young people, this is what they want. When in fact, no, the majority of young voters don't have an opinion about this topic, one way or the other. And like I said, that's heartening to me. But Joe Biden would like their parents and their grandparents and everybody else who may be sort of only half in on this issue. What he basically wants, in my opinion, is for the majority of voters to not hold it against him. Remember, they talk about the Jewish vote. It is so small. Even if they all were formerly Democrat voters, and even if they still voted Democrat, it's such a tiny number of people. It's not going to swing one or the other. He wants the majority of the voters to not care one way or the other how he treats Israel, and to maybe potentially agree with him. And doing this and having them believe that their children and their grandchildren and, that this is the zeitgeist and, they were killing babies, whatever, that supports what he's got going on. All right. So the next thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about was what's going on in education policy, et cetera, as we come to the close of this year, where we are, et cetera. And what I would like to start with is if you haven't seen it, I'm going to start with this also because I want you to see it. It is 7 minutes long. I'm not going to play it uninterrupted because this is me. So it's probably going to take like half an hour to go through it. But I'm going to play it and pause periodically to have some commentary. But I needed to make sure you guys saw this, and I want to add my 2 cents because, like I said, it's me. So if you have not seen Virginia Fox going at Secretary Cardona, it was a beautiful thing. I personally was very happy about it. I don't know how you guys will feel, but I'm going to try to make this make her bigger, and like, you don't need to see like all of this junk. You just need to see her. So we're gonna, and you almost don't need to see her. You need to hear her because she just knocked this right out of the park. All right, let me get over here. All right. So this is what you need to pay attention to. This is the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. Virginia Fox's scathing opener, Secretary Cardona. It's so good. Anyway, enjoy. If you can't hear for any reason, please do let me know.
Secretary, I was truly excited that a person with your personal and educational background was named Secretary of Education. And you know I have told you that. However, you have not lived up to your potential. The educational decline was not without warning. Upon your confirmation, I issued a press release saying, the teachers' unions and left-wing special interest groups are keeping our schools closed, despite the serious consequences for students, academic success, and mental health. Serious consequences may have been the understatement of the century.
You think?
Since the last time you testified, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, released its 2022 math and reading scores. The results were disturbing. Reading scores plummeted to the lowest level in the history of NAEP testing. Across all subjects, American K-12 students saw a steep drop in educational attainment, thanks in large part to the Biden administration's lockdown policies. The negative consequences of learning loss for this generation's future employment and earnings will be devastating. If I were to grade your tenure based on the state of K-12 schools, I'd give you an F. Failing NAEP scores are not the only negative development in education since our last oversight hearing. Over the past 7 months, colleges across the nation have seen an unprecedented regression in moral and institutional legitimacy as anti-Semitism and pro-Hamas protests have engulfed campuses.
Now, it should be noted that she's one of the very few people who has accurately referred to them as pro-Hamas, because these students who've been engaging in these protests have explicitly said things that are pro-Hamas. Some people have said, don't say that, that's mean. I'm like, but it's true. And so what you've seen is a lot of people in the public eye refusing to say that, and they keep calling them anti-war, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, pro-Gaza, whatever. No, they're pro-Hamas, because if you're calling for ceasefire and you're saying things like from the river to the sea, you essentially want Hamas to win. So it's really important. It seems like a small thing, but rhetoric matters here, and calling things what they actually are makes a difference.
On the news, and universities such as Columbia and UCLA look like unrecognizable war zones. From the beginning, I've urged a firm hand in dealing with the explosion of anti-Semitism on campus, and I've led by example. You, on the other hand, refused even to say that the from the river to the sea chant is anti-Semitic.
How can it not be? Again, we know what it means in the context of the Hamas Charter, and it essentially means no Jews whatsoever in the land. No Israel is what it means. What else is that? Where are they going to go? That is anti-Semitic by definition.
I saw this as about a failure of moral clarity, deeming you unfit for public office, and call for your resignation in February. With the outbreak of campus riots, I'm only more resolute, so I will say it again. You must resign. If I were to grade your time as secretary based on the state of post-secondary education, I would also give you an F. My final report card grade is based on your tenure as an administrator.
Now, I want you guys to listen very closely to this part, because as bad as all this was, and this is like stuff where this is sort of opinion in terms of she disagrees and she thinks it's so do I. So do maybe many of you thinks it's anti-Semitism. He should have led by example. Even believe it or not, the results in K-12 that she's laying at his doorstep, which I mean, the buck should stop there. But at the end of the day, the Secretary of Education doesn't have sort of direct influence on those scores. But it's his thing. So, but as bad as all that is, everything she's about to cover should make you want to go to Washington, D.C. with a pitchfork and a flaming torch and get this guy out of office. This guy. So listen carefully, because when we're talking about the state of education in America, everything she's about to say, like my hair was on fire.
Again, I warned of the potential pitfalls of mismanaging programs such as the FAFSA rollout and the student loan return to repayment, but the department managed to bungle both. FAFSA simplification has been the law for the entirety of your administration, but last year was filled with delays and excuses. In March of 2023, after months of refusing to communicate a FAFSA release date, the department announced it would push the implementation of the FAFSA Simplification Act back from October 1st to what ended up being December 30, 2023. The October deadline should have come as no surprise. Congress had already granted the department an additional year, and you still couldn't get the job done.
That's unconscionable. When you see how many times Secretary Cardona was, talking in front of unions, talking to different people about how to get money from the federal government to pay for mental health stuff. Oh, I advise you to take the money and go set up sustainable funding for mental health care in your schools. Oh, community schools are the next greatest thing. This dude had an administrative task for FAFSA simplification. We're talking about software here. We're talking about a technical rollout that he is supposed to get the team together, hire the right people, get the ball rolling, have a project team. He's had 4 years. Now, I used to work in a technology company that did these kind of big rollouts of big projects, whatever. And I know that they've had a bigger budget than any private corporation ever had to do anything. It is absolutely unconscionable that they not only had so many delays, but that they just didn't do it. Just kept missing their deadlines. He was busy doing every other thing to do with politics and going against Republicans and getting the ideology pushed and the DEI and all this other crap and gender woo and everything. Meanwhile, he's an administrator. He's not supposed to go in there and set a standard for ideological norms in education. So this is extraordinary.
Then the December 30 soft launch was filled with glitches.
That's putting it mildly.
Prospective college students fought through random crashes and lengthy waiting rooms to submit their completed FAFSA application, only to be met with uncertainty. For the applications that did make it through, large percentages contained errors, were unable to be corrected, or both. In some cases, these errors took months to be fixed. A financial aid administrator survey of schools just last week found that over 30% of schools have still not even begun to package aid offers, thanks to your delays. The delays and uncertainty have crushed students and universities. FAFSA completion rates have fallen 30% nationally, with declines likely even higher among low-income students.
So as much as I don't like the fact that we have these federal loans that, go to students and stuff like that, these people I guarantee when the numbers are down for low-income students going off to college, they will use that statistic to justify more bullshit equity shit when it's their fault. They didn't do the rollout right. These kids are not getting their aid packages. They will not be able to go to school this year. And for many, that will mean heading off into the workforce or doing something else or just giving up and not doing it at all. And she goes on to say that. But that failure will be twisted around like every other failure of the Department of Education and to be, see how oppressive everybody is. Look at these poor kids didn't go to college. Mwah. They are never held accountable for their own fuck ups.
Universities are expecting decreases in enrollment in the fall that could be even worse than the pandemic. Attending college is one of the most consequential choices that some may ever make. For many students with very limited means who depend on the FAFSA, that choice has been denied to them. Some will inevitably put education on the back burner for life. That's what troubles me the most about this. May 1 should have been College Decision Day, but instead students are still stuck waiting for financial information, paralyzed by your ineptitude. FAFSA should have been a top priority. Instead, your actions proved time and again that it wasn't. When the department should have been pouring time and resources into FAFSA, it was pouring time and resources into the latest student loan debt scheme. The newest scheme, the IDR Save Plan, adds to your department's actions that could cost taxpayers up to $1 trillion.
Let's just sit with that one for a moment, shall we? Could cost taxpayers up to $1 trillion. Hey, Deb, how much do we spend on education, period, every year? Oh, roughly 8 to 900 billion. So pretty close to $1 trillion as it is. And now this. And now this. What?
For perspective, these actions are more expensive than all post-secondary education spending before 2020. The Higher Education Act passed in 1965, yet you're projected to spend more on just the Biden student loan debt scheme than all other secretaries spent since 1965.
That's my entire lifetime, y'all. What? This one guy. When I said at the beginning of the segment that you should want to be like resign, like he needs to go. But understand something. He was brought in to do this exact thing. He was brought in and appointed to do this, to buy votes, to set things up in such a way. And you might be wondering, it's like, well, who's getting all this debt repayment, whatever? It's not poor kids. It's not. It's not those kids. Who's getting it are people with post-secondary, like graduate degrees, lawyers, people getting MBAs, et cetera, and so forth. They're the ones getting their loans repaid right now. And I can't.
Fine. I've completely lost faith in this administration to govern. Your radicalism has alienated loan servicers and caused the administration to bungle the return to repayment. 9 million borrowers missed their first repayment. I'm not sure this administration ever wanted repayment. I think you see it as politically advantageous to kick the can down the road.
Of course, they don't want people to pay, because if people don't pay or they come up with reasons they can't pay or whatever, then they come swooping and going, we'll pay. Yay, thank you, Biden administration, whatever.
So you did. Therefore, if I were to grade your tenure as an administrator, I'd give you an F. On all the broad strokes, you have a failing grade, but there are plenty of other specific issues to discuss today. The department has failed to protect young women with its Title IX rewrite, failed to return employees to the office to work in person, and failed to pass its 2023 financial audit.
They didn't even audit themselves. Their workers don't go to work. Even the Department of Education, they are government employees and they're working from home. like there's some things that just get me so angry. I start to shake, and listening to this and knowing as I do what he has been working on, what he has devoted almost all of his time and energy to, which is just pure toxin between the Title IX thing and the DEI thing and the equity thing and the mental health and the schools thing. And he's left this pile of shit. It defies reason. Like, he should be run out of town on rails. And what I don't understand about the US taxpayer, and I'll never understand it, is how we sit and we placidly listen to this stuff and like, yeah, that's bad. Meanwhile, people go into the streets and block bridges, whatever, or shit happening thousands of miles away that doesn't really have anything to do with this. It really doesn't. It's really not our business at the end of the day. It does concern us, but on a day-to-day basis, not like this. Not like this does. And what are we doing about it? Nothing. This is what we should be protesting. We should be on the freaking lawn in front of the damn White House, scaling the fence for this shit. Why not? And now I'm going to have the FBI at my door or whatever saying, you're calling for insurrection. I'm not. I'm just saying it baffles me that we have so many people who just, could, if they even heard about this, because is the media even covering it? No, except to say, oh, Virginia Fox was mean to Cindy Sheehan when she got in the members only elevator to go to her office and said, you can't come in the elevator and get away from me and stop harassing me. And there's Cindy Sheehan like, but don't you care? The protesters. Why are they covering this? Have you guys seen this anywhere? Have you seen anywhere other than Virginia was mean to Miguel?
I see each of these failures as a result of the original failure that the federal government inserted itself into education in the first place. There are good reasons why the word education does not appear in the Constitution. Education is done best when it's handled at the local level. The solution is not more of the same, which is what the president's budget represents, but less of what has sidetracked our country's educational system, the Department of Education itself. As President Ronald Reagan once famously said, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Mr. Secretary.
So that was Virginia. Awesome, right? That was really great. And also really awful at the same time, as I'm sure you would agree. Really scary that we're now looking at another $1 trillion on top of the almost $1 trillion. But here's the thing. One could argue that the $1 trillion we spend each year on education at least gets something. Schools, teachers, stuff, whatever. I mean, we don't. Obviously, most school, that's including what states are spending. But I'm just saying that money that the country is spending as a whole in terms of taxpayer dollars, at least is getting schools as much as they suck. There's a thing, okay? The $1 trillion she's talking about is taxpayers who are working hard and paying their taxes not ever getting back the money we loaned against our will, because, they decided to lend it to people out there getting this intangible thing called a college degree or a graduate degree. We, the American people, got shit for that. So we lose that $1 trillion, it's gone. It's not like we took people from not reading to reading, we hope, a little, maybe. There's not even the hope of that. It's like some clown out there now has a sociology degree and we're never going to get paid back. Now multiply that times millions. That's what that represents. And that's Miguel Cardona. One guy, more money in his tenure than all the previous secretaries of education, even from before the Department of Education existed as such, going back to 1965 when it was under labor. Yeah, so I had to show that to you. As far as state of education right now, bad, really bad, just in terms of dollars, right? Now, you might be wondering, what are some of the other issues that we face moving forward in education for the next year. And I have something. Here we go. Here we go. So what I found to show you is something. This came out actually in January, but it's still, oh, it's not the one I meant to use. I apologize. This is the one. Okay. So you can see this a little better. It's kind of big though. Let me see if I can fix this to be ever so slightly smaller. What the frickety frack? Okay. It's not letting me. All right, there we go. And that's a little bit too much. All right, so this came out in January, but I think it's still relevant in Forbes. And this is education trends to watch in 2024. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, this one, chronic absenteeism. This is a big one, really, really big one. After COVID, we saw a lot of absenteeism even online with COVID, and that was sort of easy to understand in the sense that people didn't want to sit in front of the computer and they were home already and they didn't log on. And what was anybody going to do about it? So you'd say, okay, they were absent and I kind of get it, right? Doesn't feel like school. I'm not going to go. But it didn't stop there. So we've been back in school now for a couple of years and millions of children are still not showing up to school. Now, this is both good news and bad news. So now, from their perspective, it's terrible, terrible news. Okay. Because the kids aren't there. Where are they? Good question. From my perspective, it's a mix of good and bad. And the bad is that if they're registered, which is the only way they'd know that they're absent. Okay. So if they register for school and they're simply not showing up, money is still going to the school or was designated for the school until such time as they were absent for so many days that now their butt is not in the seat and they don't get the money for average daily attendance. So the reason that a lot of educators are upset about it is not so much because they care about the kids, because money follows those kids into those seats. And if they're not there, they don't get the money. The other which again is sort of good news for me. But the other thing is, if they're not there, they can't possibly be indoctrinated, right? I'm so cynical. Thing is, we don't know where they are. And I'm like I said, I'm sort of laughing about it, but on the other hand, I'm a little nervous because I'm afraid that harping on chronic absenteeism is going to be used as a justification to have more truancy officers and start having things like digital IDs where your child has to like sign in every day for school, and if they're not there, they're going to follow them with some kind of weird GPS of where's their ID, and they're here, they're there, they're wherever, and they're going to just use it as an excuse to track your children all the time if they don't show up to school. And I don't like it when they talk about not knowing where our children are as if it's a problem for them and not us, the parents, because it tells me they're looking for ways to have more supervisory authority over our children than they already have. You know, if you can't get our kids to go to school, that's where you should just stop. But we have truancy laws, and yet they don't have enough people to go enforce them. So what do I think of next? Technology. So when I see things like this, and it's here, and it's also in Education Week. How can we fix chronic absenteeism? 5 steps to ramping up family and student engagement. And they give these things like, what can they do? Restore the belief that showing up to school matters. They're going to start to do these things, or address the erosion and positive conditions for learning, blah, blah, blame the child and their family. All of this is, I think, just sort of creating the condition where they can come in and say, we're going to make it easier on you, and we're going to have a digital way to track where these kids are. We'll see how it works out. But if it does come to pass, you can say you heard it here. All right. So that's one of the first trends. You'll start to hear about it. Oh, this is interesting. School discipline. It's always dangerous to conflate social media with the real world, but if you follow any popular teacher education related accounts on Instagram or TikTok, you will be constantly bombarded by teachers complaining about student behavior. Oh, yes. If there's one area where social media is reflecting real life pretty closely, it's school discipline. I don't say that about many things on social media, but when you see those fights and you see all the stuff about kids being disrespectful towards their teachers, is it every school? No, of course not. Is it too many schools? Like, let's say most, let's say the vast majority in urban areas, certainly, and even a sizable number of classrooms in suburban areas. Yeah, it is. Everything from just sassing the teacher and not listening and not doing the work, all the way up to beating the teacher around the head and face. That happens. Okay. So this is becoming a hot topic. And this was back in 2022. This Forbes published a nationally representative survey of teachers. 58% of them reported their class had been disrupted by student discipline. That was in 2022. And I know for a fact it's gotten worse. Of those teachers, 19% reported 5 or more student discipline interruptions during the day. And in another nationally represented survey of teachers conducted by EdChoice, student discipline issues were the most common classroom interruption selected by teachers with 35%, et cetera, et cetera. And there appears to be a well-needed correction in thinking about student discipline issues. I couldn't agree more. I'm just worried about what they think the correction should be. For a long time, the focus was on the student who was disruptive. Why was he or she acting out? Was it some unmet need? Was the teaching not engaging enough? Concerns about the school to prison pipeline, change thinking about punishments. We know this restorative justice. I've talked about it on the channel a lot. Like, oh, we just need to listen to the student and why they're acting out, as opposed to that's against the rules, you're suspended, like it was when I was a kid. Lost in that discussion was the impact on all the other students. Hey, I've been saying that for years. Remember those kids? They need to learn too. It's like the 81% of students who want the other students to be held accountable on the college campuses. Well, guess what? They were high school seniors who missed their graduation during COVID. And now they're facing senior year of college with this mishigas going on their campus. So imagine how they must feel. And does anyone care about them? Not enough people. So, that's something. Now, what is Deb's assessment of the new focus on school discipline? Same thing as I said about the absenteeism. When you have problems that essentially manifest as we can't control the kids. Like if we're gonna like distill it down to, gosh, those pesky children do things that we don't want them to do. The institutional response typically is some form of command and control, but they also want to look like the nice and gentle people, so they do it in a hidden way with technology. So I think this is going to be another area where they implement technological responses to school discipline. So, maybe what it will be is the students who are misbehaving are going to have to all go in, some one location and do things on a computer. Maybe they're going to have to be subjected to more SEL data mining of like answer these 17,000 questionnaires and sit for therapy while we data mine you and bombard you with more information. Or maybe they won't go after the kids who are misbehaving at all. And maybe they're just going to try to gather so much data to analyze the data about all of the things that are setting them off. Again, I just worry that they're not going to use human beings and strict discipline on the perpetrators, because that would be an about face like you've never seen. If you try to go from DEI and equity and restorative justice and SEL to fix discipline with sit down, shut up, and you're going to the principal's office, no bag of chips for you. You're going there, you're in detention, show up on Saturday morning, it's 1984 again, or what, like, you're not going to do that. That's not going to happen. That's way too big an about face politically, ideologically. I don't see that. So I don't know how it's going to manifest, but I just have a sneaking suspicion this is going to be some big argument for, everybody going to school online. Now we don't have, discipline problems anymore, or everybody's got a headset on, or we're going to do heart monitors and we're going to do all these kind of monitoring of the kids. Oh, look, their blood sugar's elevated. We need to do more counseling. Here's some more drugs. Call me a cynic. I think they're talking about the discipline. And if you're going to get excited, go, oh, goody, they're going to do something about it. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think so. All right. Math education. That's the next little trend. When the results of the massive program for international student assessment, PISA, were released in December, American students reported substantial declines in their ability to do math. I will maintain and I will die on this hill that it is because we use technology too much to teach math. We don't do traditional math instruction with memorizing of multiplication table, et cetera, anymore. It is experiential math. And we're exposing the children to math. It's equity math. It's things like that. And strategies. We're going to learn the 5 and 6 different strategies to do a given math problem, as opposed to here's the one way, do it. And if you have problems with that, come to me. Not here's 6 different ways to do it. Now choose. Oh, show your work with all of them. I want to know that you know how to do all of them. And the kid's like, what? Now write me a little paragraph about why you chose that strategy. Here's your exit ticket. Like dead serious. When my kids were in school and when they were in school up until COVID, and the way they were teaching math, I'm like, no one could learn math this way. If you put me in that class, I'd be like, what? And I know math. So at least the math they needed to know. So, one of the happy stories of the past decade or so of education has been the success of the science of reading movement, which appears to have had a positive effect on student reading skills in the states and districts that have implemented. Thank God. It isn't perfect, but it does seem a step in the right direction. I have to admit my ignorance here and state that I don't know if there's a commensurate movement in math. No. Or if there's even the same level of agreement as the path forward. No. Longtime observers like Tom Lovelace have me worried that there is not. And you're right to be worried because there isn't one. If there isn't, there needs to be. Well, Matt's Emily Hanford. So if you are in California or pay attention to the California math framework, you know that they've gone whole hog the other way, that math appreciation is all the rage now. So I have a sneaking suspicion we're going to go a part way down a path like they did with whole word reading with math until such time as people really firmly realize this is folly and turn back. But probably a generation of kids will be completely reliant on calculators. And that's if they even know what operation to do on the calculator to solve their problem. It's going to be ChatGPT, balance my checkbook. I mean, it's bad. So there'll be an easy generation to take advantage of in terms of taxation and loans and all kinds of things. And then we get to this question, which cracks me up a little bit. Is it the screens? I think it's the screens. I agree. Keeping on the PISA theme, after multiple iterations of disappointing test scores have emerged both in the US and abroad, people have started looking for explanations. Well, screens are only part of the math thing. How can nations with different education systems that responded to the pandemic in different ways be seeing such similar trends? Because we didn't respond so very dissimilarly, and because education was on the decline in the West before COVID. Everyone wants to pin everything on COVID, you guys. It's not COVID. It was getting bad before COVID. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So they say phones, right? That's definitely part of it, but it's not all the story. 2 2023 pieces in The Atlantic persuaded me on this issue. The titles say everything you need to know. It sure looks like phones are making students dumber, and get phones out of schools now. Now, I'm happy to report that there are some schools, private, they're mostly private, that are having strict no phones policies in the school, and it does seem to be helping where that has been implemented. To the extent that they have even broached the subject in public school, believe it or not, parents are opposed. Now, here's one area where the left has gone so far overboard, getting parents terrified of gun violence in schools and things. The parents don't want their kids to not have their phones because they're terrified they won't be able to communicate with the outside world if some horrible shooter comes in. Now, the likelihood of that happening has been so grossly overblown that now we may not be able to get the phones out of the schools, which is not overblown as a problem because of it. But we do need to get the phones out of the schools. So let's see. That's that. Now, I was poking around for other things to look at to talk to you about the state of education in America. And I just found this that was published today that, before I dive into this, I want to check some of your comments because I don't want to get too far afield after you guys have been saying some stuff. So let me go back here. Oh, hi, right, said Fred. Welcome. Nice to meet you. I'm glad you discovered us as well. And then Silent Bee says, I hope this is the one and only, right, said Fred. Leave them kids alone says, never ever held accountable unions either. They control it all together. They do not care about the kids. They just want money, endless money, 100%, and political power, which of course is the same thing. All right. Adrian had to leave us for a little while. Let's see. Ego Brain, you had not seen Virginia Fox? Then I am glad that I showed that to you because every taxpayer I don't care if you have kids in the system or not. Everybody needs to know this. So if you know somebody who's a taxpayer, which is basically everyone you know, you might want to show them that, because the vast majority of people don't know, because the media is not really covering it, except to say what a big bad meanie Virginia Fox is, but they don't tell you why they say that. Right said Fred says, yes, she is. I don't hear about the things she discusses here. Also, I assume you're talking about me. I like her common sense and passion. People like her bring some hope. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I try to cover things that aren't really being talked about elsewhere, at least in more depth than people are talking about them. And Ego Brains is absolutely insane. I cannot be convinced that most of the government is working on its intent. It is hard to believe it's not intentional, right? I actually think to a certain extent it is. But I think it's just a gross miscalculation. In other words, what we call destruction, you and I would call destruction, they think is a realignment. They think it's a reimagining, a rethinking, a retooling, pick a word, right? So I think people in power have convinced themselves that they are changing America for the better, to be more inclusive. And I think a lot of the people really are true believers in that. That's like a cult. And they're not sitting in a dark room going, hey, we're going to destroy America. I think the people who are, loyal to Iran and Islamists are, oh yeah, they just want to destroy us. And I think, chaos farmers like George Soros and his ilk and the WEF definitely do want to bring us to our knees so they can reimagine the world in this globalist utopia way, but they first have to take us down a peg. But I think it's more like that. I think it's more the fragilistas who everything has to be controlled, or I can't handle life. Nothing can just be individual choices because people decide things wrong, like Hillary Clinton. People make wrong choices or Nancy Pelosi. The people, these poor dears, if you haven't seen it, there's a debate between Nancy Pelosi and a young gentleman at Oxford. It's making the rounds on social media. See if you can find it. Look for Nancy Pelosi Oxford debate. Just happened. Watch that thing. It will blow your mind the way she talks about the American people. It's like, wow. We're just like, I don't know. We're something between infants and chimps, basically, to listen to her talk about us. And I think that's how the elite, for lack of a better word, genuinely think about us. It's beyond deplorable. We don't know. Nancy says, we don't know the right things. We don't know. So they have to choose for us because we just don't know what's best for us. All right. So let's see. Leave them kids alone. Says that was an awesome burn, using Reagan's words correctly rather than butchering the quote and try to rewrite it as Cardona did. Yeah, I remember that. Thank you for reminding me that Cardona did botch it. I can't even remember what he said. And Justin Average Man says they will start to want to GPS track kids. I think they will. I do. I think that we are getting to, there was just something I saw today with Biden being pro digital ID for all of us. They tried it with the COVID thing. Well, that didn't go over so well. Too many people didn't get a shot. They're still working on that. They still want that. And people go, you already have a driver's license. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't track my every move. I don't have a chip monitoring where I am all fucking day, or that is on me so that when I walk past certain things, it documents where I was in a given day. We don't have that yet. And, people in China have that. Their phones. Okay, this is your GPS right now. They can absolutely find out where you are at any given moment from this. It is no thing at all, nothing at all, to have the kid's phone. If your kid has a phone and you install an app that they'll be required to have for school, to get their assignments, something that they need, their assignments, maybe it's their free lunch pass, maybe it's their way to get in the building. Oh, it's for safety. This will then follow them wherever they go. You mark my words. This is coming. Then Ego Brain says, don't schools have ISS anymore? In my school, you would just be sent there. You couldn't talk and could only do work. They even bent the seat back so you couldn't sit back. I don't think that's like a standard anymore. I think they probably consider that cruel and unusual and whatever. There may be some schools that still do, but I'm unaware of it. They will SEL the heck out of those kids to fix discipline with meditation. Yes, they will. And drugs. Because they're starting with the Community schools, I'm going to try to see if I can get Kelly to come back and maybe Lisa and do a little panel show to talk to you guys in depth about community schools. But in the meantime, you should absolutely be following Lisa Logan and Kelly S on X so you can keep tabs on what's happening in community schooling, because that's where the medicine is coming into the school, and they will be able to medicate and inject and whatever your children without any further consent that you may have already given for emergency services pretty dang soon. And especially if your child's over the age of 12, you won't even need to give consent. Justin Average Man says, here in California, the Freckles program has a social media profile. The kids generate an emoji type profile that gets them to contribute more and more and more if they like to profile and straight. Absolutely. Training our kids to be open books and to be very used to being surveilled 24 hours a day, to having adults who aren't their parents know where they are or where they're not. Desensitizing them to that has been part of the education project for a very, very long time. And it will give the state the information freely. And as I said, we already have Class Dojo. We have all these little apps that they're putting on the phone. Chronic absenteeism, the reason they're talking it up is to justify the forcing of those apps. They're already practically forced to use them because, again, they tie something your child needs to the app. So you have to actually work harder to get the information outside the app that your child needs or that you need. And they're going to keep pushing that envelope. Eager Brain says, the way they teach math today is just confusing. When my son was in online school, I just taught him how I learned it. Yeah. And when my daughter came out for homeschool and I put her in a new math program, we started at the beginning. Literally, I'm talking 10th grade, we went back to addition because I realized she'd been taught in this wackadoodle way that she was struggling and frustrated and couldn't even do the 10th grade math because of everything. So we went back and she plowed through the first book and she's like, why didn't they just teach us this way in the first place? This is really easy. It's actually even kind of fun. And I'm like, yeah, wouldn't that have been nice? But they didn't. Leave Them Kids Alone says, with math, they tried to insert the feelings into it, asking 6th grade, why did they do it that way? My kid, because I did, because that's how you do it. Yeah, that's what they would do. I remember my daughter would come home so frustrated. She's like, Mommy, they wanted me to, I got marked off on my math because I didn't explain why I used a strategy. And her daughter was like, because it works, because that's my favorite one, because it works, because I like it, because reason, what is that is the dumbest question ever. Because it works. Leave Them Kids Alone, you are less cynical than I see Cardona is specifically trying to destroy it from the inside out. He was chosen, and you may be right. But I think most people are useful idiots rather than, like that. So who knows? John Kerry has made speeches just like Nancy saying the elitists need to choose first love. Oh, I remember. Do you remember Leave Them Kids Alone back during the Iraq War? When John Kerry made the talk about like, oh, their only choice is go in the military. It's dead end to go in the military. And he was like taking a crap all over people who volunteer to serve their country in the military rather than going to college or getting some job at McDonald's or whatever. And I was like, blah, blah, blah. Like, what did you just say? Yeah, unbelievable. So anyway, those are your comments. I'll come back after we go over some of this. So I found this. This is from the Heckinger report covering innovation and inequality in education. So obviously not a publication that I'm, too super fond of because they're covering inequality, but to their credit, they're covering it mostly statistically. The issue I have is when we get into trying to figure out what the statistics mean, okay, which is wide open to interpretation. So this is about academic progress of Black students has followed a bumpy path since the 70s. So this goes into how this person wanted to look at trends in the 70 years since the Supreme Court Brown v. Board of Education, which is, if you recall, said that separate but equal is still unequal. Or I'm sorry, separate but equal is still unequal. It's still wrong, and we needed to integrate the schools. And that decision declared that racial segregation was unconstitutional. Ever since then, what I've noticed in education media is they've been trying desperately to make it sound like forced desegregation was a good idea. Now, we can all agree that arbitrarily and by law, segregating schools is immoral, wrong, shouldn't happen, totally unconstitutional. I like to believe we can all agree that that is 100% unfair to just say you may not attend this school because you're Black or you're white or whatever. But that is not the same thing as saying, hey, school over here that has for the last 50 years been a predominantly white school, we're now going to force bus people from your district over to this district. And we're going to force bus people from over here to over here. So there's integration where it's like anyone who can get to the school can get there and can go there. And you can't say no. Totally agree with that. And it should have stayed there, because then people who liked their school situation, if they were in a Black school and they liked their teacher and they liked their school, they could keep their school. If you like your school, you can keep your school. They could have. Because remember, the issue was that there were a few students who wanted to go to a different school, but they couldn't because it was arbitrary. Not exclusively these schools are all uniformly terrible. They weren't. They weren't. There would have been some students who would have just stayed put. But along comes the government to help them, sticks them on a bus to ride, I don't know, an hour or whatever, especially in the 70s, across town to the white school where people were just told yesterday, hi, you're a terrible racist. Welcome the Black kids. Like, you can't change culture that fast, much as you would like to, much as I would like to. It doesn't work like that. So that created all kinds of problems for the students coming in, for the students going out, for the schools receiving them, et cetera. That was quite a shift overnight and by force. And the other mistake that they made with that was in assuming that any disparities in academic achievement were the fault of the schools not being mixed, as opposed to something else. So socioeconomic status, literacy on part of the parents, ability to buy books or take in the library. I mean, there could have been like 100 different things causing a disparity because of historical racism and Jim Crow. Absolutely, probably played a role. But not sitting next to a white kid in class probably didn't have anything to do with it. Okay. So conflating these things and acting like, aha, we've fixed it. We will close the achievement gap by doing this. It just defies reason. There are too many variables they didn't take into account. And ever since, they've been trying so hard to justify it and say, no, really, it helped with achievement. When in point of fact, probably not. There might have been other things that helped since then, but that's probably not the one. So it does say the data showed considerable progress in integrating schools. Well, they had no choice, but also some steps backwards, especially since the 1990s in the nation's biggest cities. We should care about this troubling shift because many researchers say that children learn best in integrated classrooms. I haven't looked at the data, so I'm not going to say a word. That's why I also wanted to trace the data on academic achievement over the same time period. Unfortunately, we don't have consistent test scores dating back to 1954, but we do have reading scores since 1971 when school segregation plummeted because of busing, and math scores starting in 1978. The 4 charts below show the achievement follows a bumpy path. Now, I want to mention that in the time period, and she does say it, here we go, the long-term assessment format changed in 2004. So one of the reasons that these results are a little wacky is that they changed the test. And you really have to take that into account. It's not like we have the exact same test they had in 1970 and we just keep giving it. And you almost have to ask yourself, why? Why did we change the test? I mean, that does skew the data, doesn't it? Because we don't know, they make it easier, they make it harder, what they do to it, okay? But they changed it, which is why you'll notice some spikes or kinks for that year in the graphs below. Since the pandemic, achievement for both white and Black students has deteriorated, but this is what I said before, the deterioration has been sharper for Black students. Well, and also deterioration started before the pandemic, as you'll see. Average reading scores for 9-year-olds on the long-term trend National Assessment of Education Progress. So here we have 2012. So things were going, it was bumpy, and it was always still lower for the Black students, but it was picking up, right? And here I think it was in I'm trying to remember, one of the charts shows that in 1988, the gap was the smallest. And then here you have this gap here wasn't too bad right here. But then everybody starts going down. And when did it really start going down? Not pandemic, 2012. And in a minute, we're going to talk about things that happened in 2011, 2012 that I think contributed to that. But that's really where it started going down for both. So it's not like it just suddenly plummeted for Black, and they're declining almost equally, aren't they? right? There's still an achievement gap, but much has been made of this gap. So we don't look at this. We don't look at that the white students have been performing, whatever. Now they're going down, as are the black students. Like everybody's plummeting. It's not good news. Even if the white students were plummeting faster than the black, thus closing the gap, if they came to you and said, oh, the achievement gap is at the lowest it's been in 20 years, but they didn't tell you it's because the white scores were going down at a rapid clip, you wouldn't know the bad news, would you? So you always have to look at these statistics and look and notice what that, how that relates to it. How the two relate to each other. Students are expected to have learned to read by age 9, which corresponds to 3rd and 4th grade in elementary school. This chart showed that young Black students progressed in reading for 4 decades from 1971 to 2012, when the scores of Black children peaked. Like I said, what happened in 2012? And it hasn't. And then it says here, the gap between white and Black students hasn't improved since 2008. Who was president? Who became president in 2008? Quiz question. Whose first term ended in 2012? Whose second term began in 2012? I'll just leave that out there. Okay. Moving on. As students moved from elementary to middle school, the improvements in reading for Black students was dramatic. In the 70s and 80s, the gap between white and Black students was at its most narrow in 88. Now, interesting to note, 1983 is when they got rid of the knowledge-based curriculum and moved on to a standards-based curriculum. It also happens to be right around the time they began with Lucy Calkins and whole word reading. So much gets made of the, white, Black, gaps, achievement, race. But if you don't take into account pedagogical trends and pedagogical shifts and teaching methodology, you're missing at least half the story. At least. Because I would argue that if you were talking about two populations of students who for years have had a gap, and now you introduce a methodology like Lucy Calkins that essentially requires kids to memorize words, which favors the kids who come to school already reading. So that means educated parents have lots of books at home, or they take in the library a bunch, or they read to them, or they speak English fluently, and they do those other things. Your teaching methodology is going to work better for the students already doing pretty dang well. And even there, it doesn't work that great, but it's going to work better for them than the kids coming into kindergarten with, I'm just now learning my ABCs. Which there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there's something wrong with it. I'm just saying that they're obviously going to be at a disadvantage compared to the kids coming in at 6 who can read when they're introduced to something like whole word reading. They're just going to forget about it. They're just now learning alphabet and letter sounds. It's a whole different thing. And I remember that from teaching 1st grade myself. The difference was dramatic. When I was forced to use that stupid method and my students in the class came in with those different abilities, it was like this. And yes, there was a fairly high correlation between white students coming in ready to read and Black students not. I think it has more to do with socioeconomic status than race per se, but because I was in urban areas, but it's just another variable to consider. Now, oh, here we go. All right. It says the gap between white and Black students was at its most narrow in 1988, but the scores of Black 13-year-olds continued to rise until 2008. In a speech delivered this year at the annual meeting of the American Educational Research Association, Linda Darling Hammond, president and CEO of the Learning Policy Institute and a professor emeritus of education at Stanford, all the bad things come out of Stanford, projected these scores onto a screen. I'm going to show you her thing, and credited President Johnson's war on poverty and new investments, spending in education for halving the achievement gap in the 60s and the 70s. Halving it. Okay. Do you remember when she said The problem is we don't really have test scores going back to 1954, but we do have them from 1970 forward. So how could Linda Darling Hammond know that it was halved in the 60s? Was she just counting the 70s? How can she tie that back to President Johnson? I find that very hard to believe. But let's take a look at her research. Let's see. It's not there. I know I pulled it up somewhere over here. Oh, wait. I'm just going to open it up to okay, let's see if I can get it. Okay, here's her thing that she's got. I think I don't think there's a way to get rid of this. No. All right. So here's her slides. The urgent need to unify research, practice, and policy to reinvent education. Every time you see the word reinvent, that should trigger your gag reflex. Remember I said, we look at it as destroy, they look at it as reinvent. So she talks about, yes, the factory model of schooling, etc. Look at this. She's quoting the same people that I quoted to argue against having government education at all. She's quoting Elwood Cubberley. Our city schools will soon be forced to give up the exceedingly democratic idea that all are equal and to begin a specialization of educational effort. Selecting the men of best intelligence from the deficient and the mediocre. Okay. So it was never, the project of public education was never about making sure everyone had an equal access to education or anything like that. So it says schools, testing, and tracking systems were designed for selecting and sorting by race and class. No, not Linda. I don't see race and class in here. I see selected by, their abilities, the best intelligence, what they defined as intelligence at the time. The fact that it did end up being sort of race segregated in the end because of who they found to be according to their tests, and they designed the tests to do that, by the way, doesn't mean that's all it was designed to sort for. And she's one to talk because today they're sorting for emotional intelligence. They want to root out all of the independent-minded, independent thinkers who have those pesky ideas about individual liberty. I want to worship my own God. I want to live my own life, not be told where I should go. I don't really want to be a collectivist. I don't want to be a hyphenated American. Oh, really? Okay, so it's very disingenuous because all they want to do is change the tests and change the standards to be the left's version of what Cubberley wanted. They still want to sort. Oh, definitely, they still want to sort. And they still want to test. And they still want to produce, a little factory of certain kinds of people. They just want different kinds of people. Don't kid yourself. They're not looking to give up this model. They're not looking to make it all, independent. So that's Linda Darling Hammond. Now, going back to what we had before, I then went and looked at this little tool, the Racial Ethnic Score Gap tool. Now, I'm still trying to make heads or tails of how to use it and what it exactly means, so bear with me here. But it says performance differences between students of various backgrounds could be the result of numerous and complex factors. You think? Score gaps is reported by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, typically compare the performance of specific student groups such as white, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, white score gaps. Why not Asian, black, Asian, Hispanic? Oh, okay. Anyway, using a single factor, in this case, race or ethnicity, to differentiate average scores between student groups. However, again, I'm so glad to see this. Factors other than race and ethnicity can help explain the performance difference that may be observed between select racial ethnic groups. The tool below can help users explore these other factors. At present, this tool uses 2019 data. So we're just using 2019. As we've seen, things have gotten worse. Things have gotten worse. So the scores have gotten worse for everyone, white included, and the gap has, I don't know if it's gotten worse, but it's stayed the same. There's no further improvements in the so-called gaps, at least on the basis of race alone. Okay. And then it says it does use 2022 NAAP reading and mathematics for grade 4 and 8. The tool allows users to see how average score gaps between the white, black, white, blah, blah, blah change when additional factors that relate to student performance are considered. Users can select a grade and deselect variables, clusters of variables. So here's what I did. Coming in here to play with this. So we have reading, grade 12. If we only look at socioeconomic status, this is the gap. All right. So what we have here too is results with confidence interval, and then show gap, score gap significance. The little asterisk just means that it is significant. So, I mean, you could uncheck that and be the same thing. But with confidence interval, without confidence interval, I'm not sure what, I guess that little line means confidence interval. So here we have just on the basis of socioeconomic status, there's a gap. All right. Then you have down here, same thing. Now, what happens when I uncheck that? Okay. We don't see anything. We have to look, we have to put in something. Now, when we look at gender, oh, I have to go over here. Sorry. Gender, not much of a gap. Now we'll add socioeconomic status, pretty big gap. Students' post-secondary plan, students' approaches to learning. Now I'll take these off. Back to just socioeconomic status. And if I take this out completely, if we're not even looking at socioeconomic status, that's the highest gap. So notice how it changes when you add that. That's pretty significant, don't you think? The gap goes down a lot. So I think this tool is really important. The tool is, but I love you. Leave them kids alone. She goes, but what is gender? You're right. What is it anymore? Wait, there's differences? Wait, let's look again. Let's add gender into it. A little bit of a change, not much. Take out socioeconomic. Oh, wow. So if we just go by gender, there is a slight difference in the gap, right? But it's the biggest gap that we know, the biggest change, I should say, is when we add socioeconomic status. Isn't that fascinating? So when we adjust for socioeconomic status, the gaps change. I think this is really helpful because this tool should help you when you're making arguments or you're talking to people and they want to sell you on the notion that, we're all racist. It's like, maybe socioeconomic status has something to do with it. I'm just saying, I don't know. It could be whatever. So that's something that you could play with. I'm going to go ahead and drop this tool in here. Now, that was just for grade 12 reading. Let's go to math. Okay, so now we have math, and we're going to take out gender, students' post-secondary plans, and student approaches to learning. These are the gaps. If we take out socioeconomic status, it could fool you, couldn't it? It could absolutely fool you. You'd just be like, oh my God, that's a huge gap. Oh, wait, that's a smaller, it's still not good, but it's a smaller gap. And then we add gender. It's a little bit of a change. We take out socioeconomic status, right? So play around with that, see what you think, but this is just something for you to consider. That was the 12th grade. Let's see what happens if we go to grade 4. Now, remember, the kids are supposed to be reading. Here we are. Take out gender, take out that. There's our gaps. Okay. So this, I think, is an improvement over what we've had before. Then let's see, what else did we have? Okay, I'm going to get rid of that. And this is gone. Not going to cover that. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, remember I said what happened in 2012? What was the thing? What were the big reforms that happened that maybe we should be talking about more? Because you're going to be pushed across the summer by the different political operatives in the media into thinking about education in certain ways, and they don't want you to remember They always want to erase your memory. They don't want you to remember some of the other variables, some of the other things that impacted education back in 2012 when the shit really hit the fan, when things started going. I mean, they're already bad. Let's not pretend that public schools in 2012 were just perfect and everything was great and everything was going gangbusters. But we definitely took a nosedive. And as much as it's tempting to blame the phones and the tech or COVID and the tech or whatever, there's a reason the phones even came in. There's a reason that COVID had the negative impact that it had. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that shutting down schools for 2 years, in some cases, in putting everybody online, wasn't going to have a negative impact no matter what. But I think part of why it had the dramatic negative impact is a function of some of the other trends that started here. Education reform, 6 big developments in 2012. Oh, what's that first one? Oh, yes. There it is. The rise of ed tech. This was a concerted effort to use tech. It's not mom and dad handed their kids phones. Parents get blamed all the time. You guys gave your kids phones. Yes. And if they went to school and the school said, put the phone away, would it really be mom and dad's fault? Well, look what they did. Ed tech. To varying degrees, technology has been involved in education for a long time. But in 2012, this is when, and it's not just these apps, it was those fucking Chromebooks. 2012 was the first year the kids went to school and were given, here you go, stare at a screen. Textbooks? What's a textbook? Oh, books to read? We're going to send you home with your very own copy of To Kill a Mockingbird? Audiobooks. Ed tech absolutely infested education, private and public, not just public. And that began. That was the big rise when everything just went. I saw it myself because that was the year I had to put my kids into school. They were homeschooled, put them into school. No sooner did they go into school, and suddenly it's like, where's your books? What's going on? Oh, we don't have books. They started the year with, look, hey, I got a Chromebook, but I have to leave it at school. What? Okay. Then enter MOOCs, massive open online courses, right? Welcome the popularization of new acronym in higher education. So now they had all these for college students could take online courses, but what they also had were online curriculum for teachers. So Common Core was already in place. Thank you, Barack Obama. But Common Core and not No Child Left Behind, the one that he came up with, like a Race to the Top or some crap like that, they emphasized, because of the standards, they created a market for things like Teachers Pay Teachers and all kinds of new third-party producers of curriculum. So a school board wasn't deciding it. A state board of education wasn't choosing the curriculum. The teacher was choosing it. The teacher was going online and picking, I'll teach science. I'll pick this, I'll pick that. And if it wasn't the individual teacher, it was their department head. It was their teaching team. It was their principal. The point is, it was opaque in terms of parents. Parents expected to have a syllabus and textbooks and things and such. What all changed? The college scorecard of financial aid shopping, that's not really super relevant. No Child Left Behind waivers. This was important. After Congress failed to pass a revised version of No Child Left Behind in the fall of 2011, the Obama administration announced that it would begin granting waivers from specific aspects of No Child Left Behind to states that could present their own plans for improving educational outcomes for all students. Now, do you think those schools really came up with good plans, or was it just a Hail Mary because the school was failing miserably and they didn't really have a plan, but they were probably in an area that supported Barack Obama and supported administration, or they were in blue states, or they were loyal to the unions or whatever. And they said, pretty, please don't punish us for being a failing school. Okay, you can have a waiver. Who loses? The kids. And which kids are going to lose the most? The kids with the biggest achievement gap. So you had 34 states in the District of Columbia were granted reprieve from some of the most unrealistic and punitive aspects of the 2001 law. Now, remember, the 2001 law, as bad as it was, and it was bad, but do you remember the stats I showed you where it said that achievement and the closing of the gap actually was the narrowest in 2008 in some respects, and the achievement was at its highest peak then? So was it really No Child Left Behind? Was it really the test that's high stakes tests? Or maybe something else? that was causing problems by 2012. Because remember, at that point, he'd been president for 4 years. Just saying. All right. So because it required 100% of students to be proficient in English and math by 2014 and implements such a high standard for adequate yearly progress goals that more and more schools were joining the ranks of the failing each year. Well, when you make things easier for teachers in terms of what they can teach, and when you kowtow to union demands about even teacher education and credentialing standards, and when you let them off the hook for these kinds of standards, and they lowered the bar. The Reader's Digest of everything I'm telling you is they lowered the bar in 2012 below where it already had been lowered. The renewed hope for the DREAM Act. So now we have DREAM Act, which made it even easier for bilingual students to never bother to learn English and to stay in the country and all kinds of things. So like that. And then Race to the Top district grants. In August, the Obama administration announced it would be expanding its Race to the Top grant program to schools, et cetera. So they actually gave money to schools that, whatever they were doing. They say the district-wide approach is to be used to support more micro-level local school programs to improve teacher effectiveness and student achievement. However, much like its larger counterpart, the Race to the Top district grants seek to promote innovation through monetary incentives awarded based on a peer review system that looks for the best proposals for seeking improvements around certain target areas. So we're giving you money on the basis of a proposal, not whether it worked, not after the fact. Not after you delivered. We're going to give you money because we liked your PowerPoint. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to translate to results. So that was that. The other thing that Barack Obama did was the Safe Schools Improvement Act. Sounds good, right? Like most federal programs, they have a name that's the opposite of what it's actually going to do. Safe Schools Improvement Act, SSIA, would amend the Elementary and Secondary Act of the ESEA to require school districts in states that receive funds to adopt codes of conduct specifically prohibiting bullying and harassment, including on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, blah, blah, blah. Did it help you guys? Did it work? Do we have less bullying? It worked, right? No? What? Why not? Do you think that when you put in place prohibitions on certain things and then you leave it up to the discretion of the administrators to define what bullying is, you actually might empower the bullies, perhaps? If you also say at the same time, because Barack Obama also said at the same time that he was going to punish schools, his Department of Education was going to punish schools if they had too many students suspended or disciplined who were Black or brown, but mostly who were Black. So if their numbers were off, if their ratio was off, and it was disproportionately students of color, they could lose their funding. So schools, while trying to implement a no bullying policy, that didn't work out so well. So, and the problem, of course, was the bullying and harassment of lesbian, gay, bisexual, whatever. So what do we have today? The bullying and harassment by these people, specifically the T and the Q. I think it's safe to say more people are getting bullied and beaten and pushed and shoved today by members of this so-called popular, group than ever before. It says, however, enumerated anti-bullying laws can help replace those negative outcomes, but they didn't. They replaced the outcome of some people being bullied and changed it to other people being bullied. The Safe Schools Improvement Act would amend the elementary blah, blah, blah in states that receive, growing up LGBTQ in America. So this is from human rights campaigns. So that's part of why they're focusing on that. But yeah. And then another thing that came into the schools in force in 2011, 2012, social emotional learning. There you go. Teaching the soft skills while we're doing anti-bullying, while we're giving out waivers for achievement stuff, because it's too hard, making everyone speak English and all that. It's too hard. And just don't suspend people if they're the wrong race. And I can't imagine why we have discipline problems, absentee problems, lower scores, etc. And of course, at the same time, the people who are today's teachers, many of whom were in teacher college at this time, We're busy learning about critical pedagogy, Paulo Freire, DEI, et cetera, intersectionality. And so there's that. Another trend to look for. So I said I'd try to balance it with good news. The Ivy League is losing its standing. Okay, maybe that one's not so good. But as America's producer of great talent, so moving on from like achievement and how we got here and how these trends are, you need to be mindful of them because they always mean something different than, like the absenteeism. But the Ivy League is losing its standing. Forbes surveyed subscribers to its Future of Work newsletter. 33% of respondents said they are less likely to hire Ivy League graduates than they were 5 years ago. Not surprising, but just thought you ought to know. So that's that little tidbit of news. But also in good news, so that like I said, I think that's kind of good news. Here's some more good news. University of Wyoming to close DEI office and reassign staff in response to legislative mandate. They have a legislative mandate to close them, and it's a state university, so they're closing them. Florida's already done this, and other places are following suit as well. And here's another good piece of news right here in my home state. UNC Chapel Hill trustees moved to divert DEI funds to police and public safety. Ooh. So this is very good news. Very, very happy to see that. So that was the last little piece of good news. Just as the Chapel Hill Board of Trustees voted to divert millions of dollars spent in diversity, equity, and inclusion programs into public safety instead, ahead of an expected policy change statewide to restrict DEI. At a special meeting Monday morning, board unanimously moved to reallocate the $2.3 million that the university spends on DEI programs toward police and other public safety measures, part of its annual budget proposal, et cetera, et cetera. My personal opinion is there's administrative bloat in the university. You think? By the way, this could be the personal opinion of the chairman of every board of every university in the nation because there's bloat everywhere. But anyway, that's really good news. Other states are trying to do the same thing. I want to see that everywhere, every state university should not be spending taxpayer funds on this garbage. Personally, I don't think it should be in any university, but if you're a private university and you want to spend your own money on this crap, that's fine. But even Columbia gets $1 billion in taxpayer money. So I just think it needs to end. Now, I want to give a shout out to Chris Rufo, who, I know he's a controversial person, but I can honestly say that he is one of the few people who has really made a dent in terms of getting up close to politicians and getting up close to boards of trustees and people like this and making them see that if they don't restrict the funding to DEI departments, they're essentially empowering commissars at their university that have a trickle-down effect into every department, literally every department. There isn't anyone in math, science, it doesn't matter. And it stifles speech and it prevents, diversity of thought and ultimately reduces the quality of the education. So well done to the extent that he and his lobbying work, writing, et cetera, have contributed to this, but also to the many, many people who have likewise supported these bills and so forth. I am very much in favor of things that restrict the ability of my neighbors, essentially. The government, by the way, you guys, is your neighbors. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. We elect them, but they're still made up of, they're not some magical people that get plucked out of the sky. And so when they go to DC or your local capital and they decide to do stuff allegedly representing you, they are saying to some people, here's what you can't say no to. Here's what you have to say yes to. That's essentially what these laws are. And here's what you have to put up with. Here's what you don't have the option to get out of. And so when we put restrictions on government, we're technically actually restricting our neighbor's ability through their vote or whatever to tell us we can't say no to stuff. That's my explanation to a 5-year-old that I would give. So teach civics to a 5-year-old. There it would be. Freedom is my ability to say no. Don't want to do that. And the government should be protecting my freedom to say no. That's its one legit job. And when they go and they vote for things that make it harder and harder and harder for me to say no to things, they are not doing their job. They are acting on behalf of my neighbors to oppress me. That's it. So all of these bills, bans, people like, you shouldn't ban books. Like, you mean restrict the spending of taxpayer money on crap I don't want to buy? Because that's what that actually is. That's not censorship. That's I, tax-paying person, say no. And guess what? The default position in a free country is no. You, person who want my money and want to spend it on a bunch of shit that I might not want, that not everybody wants, the burden is on you to justify it and sell it to me. And when you can't, you don't get to just get 51% of my neighbors to tell me, too bad, so sad, you can't say no. That's not freedom. That is why democracy sucks. Truly. I mean, it's better than the other options, but it's a form of tyranny. So, anyway, all right, one last run through of the comments real quick, and then we will finish up. So Leave Them Kids Alone says, absolutely trying to segregate through affinity groups at school, making it normal to be separate, not celebrating heritage anymore. It's more absolutely separate, like Black Students Unions. Exactly. So the irony is, we got to desegregate so we can resegregate. They're now resegregating, and just on a different way. So Linda Darling Hammond is there going, oh, and it was bad because of sorting and this and that. And like, you're literally doing the same thing. You just want to sort differently. Just an Average Man says they give iPads to kids instead of textbooks. I know those things are already being tracked. They also track search history. Absolutely. So we know they're already putting in place. And every kid who downloads Class Dojo, same thing. And they get the parents to download them as well. So they're tracking the parents. They're tracking all the things we do. And I've had a teacher, just as a note, before I read your comment, I downloaded Class Dojo for my kids when they were in the school. And actually had a teacher say, I notice you haven't opened the thing and you haven't messaged and commented. I don't see you commenting or liking any of the posts. And I'm like, that's not creepy at all. I was like, why do you care? Well, that's really meant for, you to see it. And I just don't know if you're seeing it because I don't see you commenting and liking it. It's like, you're not the boss of me. Go away. I liked it better when teachers didn't know what I was doing in my home. Thank you. Just an Average Man. And many public schools allow kids free time to have essentially recess on the web in the classroom, and everything is being logged and tracked. It's all associated with the child's device. Yes. Absolutely. They also let them use their own devices out on the playground. So they're not even talking to each other. They're not playing with each other. They're not running around and getting exercise. So Sophia says, you are correct. The lines being competent. Thank you. I'm not that great at understanding. That's not very well designed in my opinion, but it took me a while to figure out that the gap was actually a smaller gap when you put in socioeconomic status. And then it was the biggest gap when you took it out. What is gender? And then Leave Them Kids Alone says, can't really compare since it's no longer apples to apples. Exactly. All right. Yes, Ego Brain, they use audiobooks in school all the time. They either use audiobooks for everybody if in a given situation, or they make it an option that this child can read the audiobook instead of read. 100%. Yep. That's very, very common. And then Leave Them Kids Alone said iPads 1-to-1 came soon after. Yep. Sophia, hooray for the Ivy League falling. I agree. They need to come down off their high horse. And, I hope they can build themselves back up again, because I think it would be good for the country to have really excellent institutions of higher learning. It attracts the best minds from around the world to come and do their studying here, possibly stay here, contribute their talents and their skills and their expertise here. These are all good for the country. I don't want to pay for it, but I think there are people, people who donate to the endowments, and the schools have huge endowments. There are all kinds of incentives to create that anyway. That doesn't have to be the taxpayers funding it. I can think a thing is good without saying I should pay for it. But it's kind of sad. Leave Them Kids Alone said, grit. My kid doesn't know what you mean by grit. What do we do to improve it, Mr. Principal? Where should these numbers be? I don't know, ma'am. Not sure. Yeah. How do you measure grit? How do you measure that exactly? Leave the Kids Alone said they must already know they have commissars in the high schools here. They have DEI compliance officers and placards all over the school. Yep. Report the teachers. Report. So we're going to crack down on bullying. Here's how to rat on people. because you're not going to use that to bully anyone. Oh, here's a report on the teachers. Teachers should report on each other and so forth. This is what they did, by the way, in the Soviet Union. Everybody's ratting everybody out. Same with East Germany. Everybody's tattling and trying to tattle first. It's like if I tattle on my neighbor who gave me the stink eye the other day before she tattles on me about something, then I can get her out of the picture so I'm not in danger of her. The same thing happens in school. They have created a culture in our nation's schools that is much more similar to a prison with the sorting and, like I'm in this group, you're in that, oh, this group's against that group, I'm going to rat you out. It's not a place where people learn anything other than how do I protect myself. And Leaving Kids Alone said, congratulations though on NC. Yeah, that's Chapel Hill. So we'll see what happens with that. And then Sophia says, I was surprised by the New York Times editorial recently. Is that the one about, are you talking about the one where they said this graduations went on without a hitch? I'm not sure which one you were talking about. Anyway, that's basically tonight's show. Once again, to summarize, what the media is not telling you is they're not telling you that all of this is very well organized and it's wide, not deep, probably designed to shore up this foreign policy of Joe Biden. Oh, I see. Oh, she says, no, a new one excoriating university leadership for failing. That would be surprising. I wouldn't mind reading that, actually. On the free speech and expression front. Yeah, well, day late, dollar short. And then, as I said, so that's, what they're not telling you. And then the education trend news stuff is be on the lookout for, as much as they talk about, are the screens hurting? Are the screens hurting? Yeah, they are. But I really still feel like the movement is towards more tech and more data gathering and more tracking of our children and of us and more heavy-handed, top-down, let us fix your kid. Your kid is broken. And here are the reasons we know they're broken. Got all this data. And what the data means is that your kid is broken. Not that our system is broken. Your kid is broken and you are broken. Your home is broken. It's dysfunctional. Especially if you push back on us saying that your kid is broken. Especially if you tell us that, no, it's us that's broken. Oh, it must be you. So that's what I got for you tonight. Thank you to everyone who came and, oh, wait. Yes, I think one last thing. Adrian says, FYI, I stumbled over a study claiming being on the internet is good for your mental health, kids included. I think I saw that. I just didn't get to read it today. There was like a headline. Love to talk to you about that one. That should be a Saturday show. But anyway, thanks everybody for coming. Please like, share. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you are not yet a member of my Woke Screen community, please consider joining. That's at The Reason We Learn. It's wokescreen.com/The Reason We Learn. And also I have a community at wokescreen.com/The Reason We Parent. And it's all hyphens in between that one. And that one's a support group. We meet on Sunday evenings and you can just, bring your questions. You can come vent. You can just, ask for advice, whatever. You can pay monthly, you can pay annually, but it is a great way to get access to me and the resources that I provide to people looking for alternatives to education, the education establishment, whether it's homeschooling or enrichment for your child who's in school. If you're looking to pick a different school for next year, even within the schooling, ecosystem, I can help you with that through these communities. So wokescreen.com/The Reason We Learn. I also aggregate my content there, including members only content on Mondays and Fridays, which I then keep in an archive page. So you can see all kinds of videos that I've done about subjects that I don't talk about live and I don't talk about in the public channel. Things to do with homeschooling specifically, things to do with, sort of culture and education issues specifically that I don't do publicly. So, and coming soon, I'm going to be doing more articles that are based on some of my work from the past that is still evergreen. I'm going to write it up for you so you can read them and not have to necessarily go sit through lots of videos. But if you haven't checked out the channel, go check a lot of the stuff, even from a couple years ago. I find this like every week, someone will say something on social media and I'll find myself wanting to go back to a video from 2 years ago or 3 years ago that explains something that they just discovered, like Kafka traps or, the equity diagram and like why it's so bad. So there's there's a lot of stuff back there that's evergreen, plus some old interviews that are still relevant. So check it out and tell your friends. Thank you very much and have a great one. Bye, you guys.